Welcome to the SDG Media Zone. We're here to talk about sustainable development in a time of COVID, in a time of economic uncertainty, at a time when inequality in our societies is on display. If the coronavirus showed us anything, I think it's that we're all connected as people, as nations. The virus certainly doesn't know any boundaries, and hence the theme today of solidarity. And we have Forrest Whitaker, actor and SDG advocate with us. We have Melissa Fleming, UN Undersecretary General for Communications. Important role because the messaging is what we need to talk about here, I think. And Farai Mubaiwa, the founder of Africa Matters. Thank you guys for talking today. We've seen the coronavirus change our behavior almost overnight. It's affected our economies. At the same time, we have this frustration growing over entrenched racism and inequalities. So we're also seeing, sadly, for the first time, some backtracking on the Sustainable Development Goals, with 70 million people falling back into extreme poverty. These are very worrying signs. So I'm wondering, how do we build back better with so many people facing these problems? National budgets are under strain. Maybe, Farai, we can start with you. Your organization is all about empowering young people, changing narratives. How do you do that sustainably under these circumstances?
Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm really, really honored to be in the presence of such incredible people as we really engage on how exactly we build back better. So for us, I think that the important thing we need to realize is that the systems that our world was built on were never fair to begin with. We have a lot of institutionalized racism, a lot of institutionalized inequality, which has made us accept things like poverty and racism as the norm, which has made us accept these negative narratives of Africa as the norm. And as we build back better, it gives us an incredible opportunity to understand that, hey, hang on, in actual fact, what we accepted as being normal was just not normal. What we accepted as okay was not okay. How do we start from the beginning? So how do we encourage countries in the global south to learn from one another and not uphold this idea of the West being the alpha and the omega? How do we look at all the positives we can bring? How do we look at harnessing the potential of young people to change the communities they come from? And particularly within the African context, I think it's super important, where we've got this huge youth population, but we're just not doing enough to harness the energy and potential of young people. And as we look particularly at how we deconstruct racism in the different communities we come from, we need to look at how have institutions been exclusionary, and how do we open them up to ensure that people of all races, from all backgrounds, can be able to grow within a country. And I think if we start from there, we'd be able to build back better effectively.
Melissa, there's a lot of blame going on between nations, between segments of societies. How do we counter these divisive narratives and building on what Farai just talked about? How do we build back better and change the narrative to be more positive?
Yeah, well, it's very complex, because I think, as Farai just said, we don't want to go back to where we were, but yet we're also in a time of enormous crisis where things are really the world is in crisis, and where we're seeing what the SDGs were trying to achieve. We're seeing everything that wasn't achieved exposed. Enormous inequalities, extreme poverty, a digital divide, health systems that are extremely weak and unequal. So we don't want to go back there. So we have a huge opportunity to deliver that message, because people feel that really, really strongly. Some people said, let's go back to where we were, but most people are saying, no, this is an opportunity to make a change. And we have that blueprint with the SDGs. I think what we're really worried about is, what are we going to have to suffer before we can do that? Because, World Bank and other UN figures are showing that We are, because of the impact of COVID-19, we are seeing so many gains over the past couple of decades in extreme poverty eradication, for example, going backwards. And so many more people are being thrust into extreme poverty. We have the World Food Program warning of a global hunger crisis. But always there is a prescription. We can act, we can have a massive global relief package. There are things that we can do to prevent this, and things that we can do right now to say, okay, let's get through this crisis together with solidarity as brothers and sisters. This virus is the only enemy. It's not the people. And let's get through this. And then when we emerge, let's have a better society built on the Sustainable Development Goals, the fabulous blueprint that we already have right in front of us.
They seem like separate goals. How do you tie the message of sustainable development to COVID?
You know, in a way, it's interesting because you would think it is separate, but this is not just a public health crisis. This has become at this same time an economic crisis. It has become a crisis of society, and it is uncovering all the weaknesses that were built into society. Unfortunately, it is also creating a virus of hate, a virus of misinformation, a virus of scapegoating, of racism that is giving people in this state of fear, widespread fear that people are in. We have bad actors trying to exploit that. So we're really calling on political leaders, but also the social, because I'm in the field of communications, we're also calling on in particular the social media platforms to help us get through this, to just say we don't allow hate on our platforms. And the only way we're going to get through this virus is to work together in solidarity.
Well, Forrest, we do live in a politically polarized country here in the United States, and certainly around the world as well. Times are tough. What can our political leaders do? What can the media do in this situation to help achieve these goals? And if they aren't going to act, what can we do to motivate them to act in the right direction?
I mean, it's an interesting time because the COVID-19 and the pandemic has brought together the world and really into sort of solidarity device. We're all together in trying to understand how to cope with this system and what's going wrong with it, how to deal with the problems that arise from this system. And what we've been able to see is that the bottom line of it, which is to survive. This has been made more bare to us because of the virus itself. I mean, take for instance the disparities that you're talking about. In the United States, 13% of African Americans make up the population. 30% of them are African American. Whereas with the COVID-19 deaths, 24% of them are dying. So it's forcing us to look at the situation, and then it's even heightened because we have to look at someone with his knees on the neck of an individual while we hear them say, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," and we're looking at who gets to survive. What is the criteria of being able to survive? And it started to make us look at our healthcare system. It makes us look at our economic system. It makes us look at our policing structures and systems. And then we have to figure out, okay, what do we do? So we have the youth, we have the people saying, we have to have some acknowledgement of what's going on, what the problem really is. And from that acknowledgement, then we have to move into someone saying that, yes, I take some responsibility. And from that responsibility, we have to move into what are the mechanisms that can make us change things. And right now, the mechanism that is pushing forward a great deal of change is protest. Right now, what's happening in this country and what's happening around the world is people coming together with a singular purpose, trying to push forward the changes. And those changes are happening on the ground in many different places, whether it be changing how you police and how you put on a chokehold of someone, or whether or not you have to reveal what were the inequities that were going on with you and your police force before. These things are all happening, and it's happening on every level And I think this has been able to catalyze us to be able to move us forward so that we can like see all of the different disparities that have to do with the SDGs, that have to do with the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we approach them and how do we solve them? And I think that's what we're looking at right now is at least some form of protest from the people themselves coming together again in solidarity to be able to say, no, I won't take this anymore. I want change. I need change for all of us, and we're all in this together. And this bug, this germ, this virus is making us have to witness it.
Absolutely. And at a time when we need to have drastic change to deal with climate as well, is an opportunity, I suppose, Melissa, right, to address major issues in a way that we thought maybe wasn't possible before. It seemed too big and too hard to change, but here in a matter of months, we brought economies to a halt and we have this opportunity, correct? I mean, that's the positive message
I
here.
think, there are many parts of the world, people were breathing fresh air for the first time in their cities. And I think that gave them this sense of, wow, maybe we could have that all the time. And we are seeing some encouraging signs from some governments and companies because they're also hearing the sentiment of the people. And they are, talking about green recovery or building back greener. And they're talking about not going back to coal and looking for more renewables. I mean, not everywhere, unfortunately. And we're really in pursuit of, delivering those messages now, because again, I agree also with what Forrest was saying. People are just fed up. They're fed up with a bad environment. They're fed up with not having the voice. They're fed up with inequalities. They're fed up with legacies, and they're fed up with injustice. And in many, in all of these areas, in a way, it is injustice. It's not protecting our world. It's not protecting human dignity and the environment with which we all deserve to live. And so I think all of us who have been fighting for a better world for so long are actually hoping. We're trying to see this silver lining, and certainly the Secretary General is delivering these messages day in and day out to the leaders of the world, including in the area of peace and security. And I'll just end with that, because he's also saying, we have one enemy right now, and it is the COVID-19 virus. Lay down your arms and let's get with fighting the virus and making the world a better place.
Farai, in Africa, is climate still part of the discussion as we talk about building back stronger and better? How do we get leaders to unify around all of these things at the same time?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. And I must say, I'm really, really privileged to be part of a network called the Resilient 40, which is a network of young climate change activists based on the continent who are constantly pushing and doing incredible work to raise awareness about climate change to governments, but more than that, to also engage on a policy level with governments. So definitely on the continent, climate change and multiple issues are definitely at the forefront. We've seen incredible leadership during this time, from our leaders in Senegal to President Kagame in Rwanda, to even my own President Ramaphosa in South Africa. So leaders responding not only to COVID-19, but also to the other matters. And I think that's been an important case that a lot of young Africans have been highlighting, that COVID-19 is not the only pandemic we're facing at the moment. Racism is a pandemic, climate change is a pandemic, femicide, which is on the rise as a result of COVID-19 as well, being exacerbated by it, is also a pandemic. And it's been really good to see our leaders definitely responding to us and hearing our calls. Although I'd say what is super important, and I'd hope that as we build back better, we acknowledge this, is that particularly as young people, we need to realize that it is not only governments who are responsible for creating and shaping the society we want, it is us as well. So the same way in which we hold governments accountable, we need to hold ourselves accountable as well. And I think Mr. Whitaker also mentioned this, that we need to ask ourselves, what can I do to shape my society? If I'm not happy with something, how do I build back better? because we do have that individual responsibility. And the more we realize that we all have a responsibility to create the peace we want, to create the systems we want, to create inclusive and enabling systems, then the better our world will transform. And the hope is that African leaders, and I think leaders around the world, listen to the voices of young people to say that, yes, we're young, and we may not have as much experience, but we do have passion and we do have skills and we've got innovation, and allow us to work beside you so that we can build back better an economy and a world that is very inclusive for all.
Forrest, what about you? Are you finding hope in the response and people in the streets in the United States? How do we channel that?
I'm extremely hopeful because I've seen them, like, as I said, be able to like start to even affect the legal system to change laws for their pointed purpose. You know what I mean? I've seen them continue to protest across not just this country, but across the world itself. And it's saying to me that change can happen. And that if we listen and allow and support the youth and those who are like out there trying to make a difference and change our society, that amazing things can really happen.
Melissa, do you see this as a time of hope?
We try to anyway. Sometimes we despair actually, because again, some of the figures that we are getting. I think Forrest also mentioned this. I mean, there was a report recently in the New York Times about how Black Americans and Latino Americans are disproportionately being hit by the coronavirus, and this is the case also in many parts of the world. And again, it again uncovers the inequalities that exist, but also these inequalities are being exacerbated by the virus, and it's just really sometimes it's just sad. It's just very sad, and sometimes it makes you angry, and I think that's what we're seeing when people are taking to the streets. It's all interlinked. It's all interlinked because it's all based on inequality and injustice. And again, then it comes back to, what is the most important quality for us all to have. The UN Charter talks about we the people, and we're all equal in dignity. And I think that word dignity is so important. And I think we are seeing, I agree, a movement of young people. It started with climate, but it is spreading even across other realms. And I do think that hopefully our leadership is listening, and that we can see some meaningful changes that will give us hope. But I do see that an end to passivity, and I think that's very important. And individual responsibility, I also agree, is very important. So in a way that we do have some signs of hope.
These things existed. They all existed before. The inequities were there, but at least the veil or that was covering them is starting to be moved aside. People are actually having to see what is the problems with all of these different structures, and then they're having, as has been said, they're taking on some responsibility for themselves of changing the world itself as it exists. And I think there's some hope in that, the recognition and acknowledgement of what's occurring, and then like the desire to actually change it and to actually put into motion some form of change in the best way that they can. And that's a hopeful place. Hopefully we'll be able to make some change in this really difficult time.
It is amazing how all of these major issues have been put before us and revealed. As you say, COVID disproportionately affected minorities. Job losses are disproportionately affecting minorities. Globally, the poorest nations are struggling the most to contain it. So if there was ever a call to work together to solve problems and raise people up from the bottom, this really does put it all on display. And that's sort of what gives me hope here. Do you, Farai, have any advice for people, for young people in particular, in making the best of this situation and keeping the pressure on their leaders? What's worked for you that we can adapt around the world?
So the Africa Matters initiative is an organization that I co-founded with a really good friend of mine. And our slogan since 2015 has been, "We are the ones we have been waiting for." And that is to tell young people, but in fact everyone in society, that you have to be the change you want to see. You have to be the one that you have been waiting for. And in this time of lockdowns around the world and of economic declines and of increased levels of poverty, look around you and look at what is your entry point into changing society. If there is a shortage of healthcare workers like there is on the continent, for example, then perhaps go into healthcare. There's a shortage of teachers in our continent of 17 million, according to the UN SDGs, that we need to fill by 2030. Now, young people look at that and say, all right, maybe I should go into teaching. So look around, particularly in this time of lockdown, where if you've got the privilege to be locked down from home like I do, you are in the comfort of your own home most often, and you can then reflect and you can look around to say, what are the inequalities which are being experienced? There are those, also in SA, who don't have the privilege of being in a safe environment. There are those who don't have natural all the time food supplies. So what role can I play? So as a young person in this time, but I think this is definitely an intergenerational message, look at what has been my contribution to society thus far, and how can I play a better role? And more than that, how do I align myself with the growth and the changes that I want to see? There's a really interesting speech that was done in the UK. I think it was by the Labour Party not so long ago. Not affiliated at all, just very inspired by the speech. And it mentioned, in times of crisis, you get to see who you really need. Do we really need the investment banker, or do we need the healthcare worker? And if we need both, how can we ensure that the investment banker is still contributing to a more sustainable society? So even in the different career options that we've chosen and the roles that we have, look at how do we shape the society we want? And upon doing that reflection, get into action, because we are the ones we have been waiting for.
Yes, and do we need to travel halfway across the country to have a meeting when we can do it by Zoom or online? Do we need to take a car and burn fossil fuels every day to go to work when we can spend some of our time working from home? There's so many possibilities. Melissa, you're the communications expert. What's the final message that you want to leave people with today?
Well, I think that there is a lot meaningful that was said here, and I think this kind of sense of the world, people around the world wanting to do something meaningful. I mean, we're getting a lot of that kind of outreach. We started an initiative recently called Verified, which is a UN initiative to really flood the internet with good information, and to kind of drown out the bad, drown out the misinformation, drown out the hate. And we've recruited 10,000 and counting so-called information volunteers around the world. And these are people who say, I want to help, not only by educating myself about how misinformation spreads and flagging it and stopping it in my own communities, but also taking good science-based information, and also stories of solidarity and hope, and spreading them around. So I think this is one of the things that we're doing that we're quite proud of. We also believe that there is a new interest in serving, not just making money, but making the world a better place by working for good causes, and definitely a new appreciation for some of the professions like teaching and healthcare that are in high demand, were undervalued, and now are so appreciated.
Well, that is a good positive note to end on. Solidarity is the theme here. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to our viewers for checking us out and caring about sustainable development.